Hi, my name is Andy Palmer. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Tamer and serving as track co-producer along my good friend JP Chevet for Virtual Track 6, the CDOIQ toolkit. It's my pleasure to introduce the next session, a 12-step program for improving organizational literacy. In this session, you'll hear about the actionable and achievable steps to truly make your company a data-driven organization. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping items. First, this session is being recorded. Any presentations will be included in the symposium proceedings. Video recordings will be uploaded to the CDOIQ YouTube channel 3 months after the symposium. And there'll be a Q&A session at the end, and please submit any of your questions to the Whova Apps Q&A tab. With that being said, I'll hand things over to Peter. Really looking forward to the talk, Peter. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy, and welcome to everybody here. For those of you that are a little confused, I'm in room 155 on this as well, if you want to just come by in person. But what we're going to talk about today is something that's a little tongue-in-cheek, but at the same time, perhaps not quite so tongue-in-cheek. So just for starters, I'm a full-time professor at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond, Virginia. I've got appointments at the Institute for Defense Analyses. I'm the president of DAMA International, and of course, working with Dr. Wang and everybody here for many, many years on this symposium. And we're so grateful for all of you for participating in this year after year. My publisher would kill me if I didn't drop up a little thing that said there's some event pricing on the books right now, including the one I'm going to talk about today, chapter 12 of data literacy. I'm going to start out by talking about other types of literacy just to sort of ease us into the process. There is some work in health literacy, for example. Many of you may remember or not perhaps that President George Bush passed a law that said we have to have uniform labeling of food products. And you're seeing one of the examples on the left there. And an example of health literacy is, can you read that label and then understand how many calories you're eating if you eat the entire container, if the entire container contains 4 servings. So there's work going on, and these are objective criteria. Similarly, in the finance area, there are questions that the groups in finance have been looking at to try and come up with these. Again, very objective criteria. If you had $100 in a savings account and the interest rate was 2% a year, after 5 years, you would have how much in the account if you let the money grow. And again, you can see the result of that. Actually, a little more on financial literacy. I don't know if any of you are fans of country music or not. This is a picture of the Louvin brothers, and the book that I pulled this story from is in the upper left-hand corner. It's a really interesting story. We're not going to get into it here, but Charlie Louvin, who's the one on the right-hand side of your screen, had a little saying, because when they got famous, they were able to put on what they called nudie suits. Now that's a N-U-D-I-E suit. And a nudie suit are these fancy country suits that they wear as they're looking at things around the performing on stage and everything like that. And somebody said to him, said, hey, you are now able to be part of the rich set that you can deduct the nudie suits from your taxes. And Charlie Louvin looked back at him and said, of course they're deductible, but before you can deduct them from your taxes, you have to deduct them from your income. Again, Charlie Louvin was clearly financially literate around this. And as a country, we've actually been working on this as a challenge all the way as well. We used to call this the National Assessment of Adult Literacy. It's now got a different name, PIAAC. Doesn't matter at this point. The measures on this are, you can see them right here, 3 different measures. 2012 was the last set before 2017. We're getting ready for another cycle to go through. And the important thing is we all understand that data is going at an increasing rate, and our literacy around these 3 topics is absolutely unchanged. No statistical differences from those times during the same time when data is just literally exploding on us. So let's take a look at what the current definition of data literacy is. This is the standard definition. By the way, when you go to Wikipedia, it's got a little bit out there that says we should merge this with information literacy, making our cousins in the library community absolutely bonkers on this because they clearly don't get it. Data literacy, the definition then is literacy is the ability to read, work with, analyze, and argue with data, but it's a very broad challenge. And much like the general concept of literacy, Data literacy focuses on these concepts, but it means there's wide variability in terms of how we're applying all of this. And it's just not going to be possible to come up with a binary definition of everybody is literate or not in the data literacy world. So we're going to look at literate enough around this. Now, as data people, we all believe that words are important. And so I'll start out with literacy, which is the ability to read and write literally, which means if we were going to do this in the data context, we would probably say something like you are data-rich, right? Well, that's not going to work. And I don't think everybody wants to start adopting new vocabularies. That said, if I had a choice between somebody who is literate and somebody who's proficient, I would certainly choose the person who is proficient in that context, because it implies not just literate, but able to do something advanced in this. So maybe these are levels that we can look at. Here's a third one on this, the word acumen. Again, if I had the ability, I would rather have somebody who had good data acumen available to work with, as opposed to working with strictly somebody who was literate around this. And these I mentioned last night at Andy's wonderful dinner that they held is a set of surveys that Randy Bean has been doing with Tom Davenport over the past couple of years. They've surveyed the same companies over a 7-year period and getting some very good results. So the first result from this is, are you driving innovation with data? And the answer is, some are saying that they are. Here are the previous year's numbers. I know that's a little bit of an eye chart for you, but I'm just making sure that you get everything. If you want to look at this in more detail, newvantagepartners.com at the very newvantage.com at the very bottom there is the link to go directly to the data sets that Randy has published for us. But you can see what you're looking at there, it is 2019, 2020, 2021, and 2022. And you'll see these numbers, there's a little bit of a dip in that process as we go forward. So here, next one, are you competing with data on data and analytics? Well, again, in 2020, there was a number, and then uniformly those went down in 2021 and then back up again in 2022. We don't know what the nature of this dip is. I'm kind of hoping that we're getting smarter about the process. Are you managing business data as a business asset? 40% of organizations claim to be doing this. However, only 27% of organizations claim to have created a data-driven organization, or even less, forging a data-driven culture. And this next one, I think, is actually the more important piece out of Randy's set of surveys here. This is in 2018, 19, 20, and 21. Randy asked these groups, are the majority of your problems people and process problems, or are they data problems? And of course, you can see what's happening here. Most organizations are saying that their problems around this are largely people and process problem. There also has been no significant changes in these over the years. Randy, Tom, all of us are calling for changes to be made at the people and process side of this in order to make these changes, because focusing solely on the technology gives you a one-legged stool, which of course we all know is not a good thing to be comfortable on. I chose the 12-step program mainly because as we get older, we do encounter people who understand what 12-step programs are. When I'm sitting around with a group of executives, guarantee there's at least one person, possibly a number, who have had some experience with 12-step programs. Now, just to be very clear, 12-step programs are not in and of themselves a panacea. 12-step programs seem to have about a 30% effectiveness rate, which actually mirrors pretty closely our effectiveness rate as an industry in the IT industry. They also are something that probably we should look at even more carefully, which is not looking at this really as a set of 12 steps, but really looking at something more closer to cognitive behavioral therapy. We're not there. I'm not qualified to talk about it in there, so that's why I chose the 12-step version of it. But think of things in these terms. It's a very different kind of a mindset that we need to take a look at in here. The 12 levels are pretty straightforward. Build them out here real quick just so that you all can see them, and then we'll go through them along the way. Of course, they're organized into a pyramid because all the time we need to do this, and this relates back to Maslow, of course, in order to do this. So let's dive in a little bit here and take a look. These are the 12 steps, starting at the bottom, working their way on up to the top in order to do this, and we'll just dive in at step 1. The organization has to state that it has a problem. Why is this important? Well, it's the same thing they want you to do in the 12-step program. You have to say, we have a problem, and if you don't recognize you have a problem, you'll be very unlikely to try and do something about it. So I've given some sample statements for the organization. And by the way, I'm not saying that you take out a full-page ad in the Wall Street Journal and say, company X here really sucks at data literacy. That's not the point. But internally, there are ways that you can communicate this all the way around to say that there is something that we need to do. People have trouble admitting, organizations have trouble admitting that problems reflect poorly on them, especially those in leadership positions. But the public acknowledgement of it is a systematic data problem, and we want to make sure that we have that. It's also important to understand that just getting data does not really help us in the overall process. Data is not the new oil. It's really closer to something I call the new soil. Two distinct differentiations there. Oil is a commodity, and we do it in a production fashion, and we never anticipate reusing it, although hopefully we all recycle our lawnmower oil when we need to do that sort of thing. That said, if you think of it as soil, there's two dimensions that are kind of better to think of it, and that is that nobody expects it to work if you just walk around the yard and spread seeds and then something good will happen. Instead, you carefully prepare the bed that you're working for, put it in specific situations, get it all set up and ready to go, and then plant your seeds. The other part of it is a time-based one. You do not plant things on Monday and expect to eat them on Friday. So when somebody does say, we're going to use data as the new oil, I would urge you to ask them to think about it again a little bit further. So we do need to get realistic in our expectations. All organizational challenges have a data root cause. I think that's an uncontroversial statement, but I'm really surprised at how much I have to help organizations really realize that no matter what problem they have, it is a data-focused problem. And the first place in a 12-step program is to start to understand that if you think everybody knows everything already, it's going to be very, very difficult to push some more things into that brain that we're looking at. So if you think you know everything, then you really can't learn anything. And that's a great way to think about it. It also does require us then to take a approach to say, how do we go about and find new ways, introduce new things into our organization? And we do that through consultants, through benchmarking, through training types of activities. So very important to say, we are starting a new situation here, because if you say we're going to try, it's not that data is going to be perfect from this point onwards. That's not what we're saying, but to say that we do have a problem and we're going to try and get better about it, that's something I think everybody can get behind. But let's make it tangible and let's make it public so that the organization can be held to accountability on this if it goes a year or so and the effort kind of fizzles around that. The second step then is to understand that the organization is responsible for the data assets. And this gets into a concept that we've had a little bit of controversy about, but not a whole lot. Just saying that I don't like the concept of data ownership. I don't like to use the word data owner. The only person who owns the, the only entity that owns the data is the organization itself. Putting a data owner in place means somebody can then say it's mine. And this is, of course, absolutely the wrong kind of data mining that we want to have in order to do this. The idea here is that we can accept the idea that data is really the root of our cause, and that we need to be able to get as good at data as we are with perhaps other aspects of our business. One final caveat on this as well, and that is that many of these organizations, in fact, virtually all of them that I have worked with over the past 40 years, have accumulated significant amounts of data debt. So this is the recognition that we're going to improve our suboptimal data practices by scoping out and executing an iteration of a data management strategy. I always tell people, when you're doing data strategy, call the data strategy your first version of it and get it done. And then go to data strategy number 2. It's really important, but if you don't label the first one, they get confused when you come at them with another concept around this. Tom Redmond introduced the term hidden data factories many years ago in a Harvard Business article, and it is a great way to describe it. People understand that these are unnecessary costs and uneven remediation approaches that organizations take. Think about it for just a minute. everybody in your organization has learned data from a different perspective. They've learned it in a different fashion, and they've learned some good habits and some bad habits, but they are absolutely not uniform because we in the academic community have not provided guidance around these areas. This is, of course, the focus of the book in order to do this. Nobody gets better at recognizing or addressing the problem if everybody's dealing with individual pieces, not understanding that this requires a systematic approach. Sustainability programs do require a programmatic effort in order to address data debt around this. And some simple things, data cannot be run as a project. A project has a beginning and a project has an end. Data does not. Data persists. It is the antithesis of a project, and it's something that we need to understand. By the way, I'll go back to the ownership concept on this as well. Who owns the accounting data? Accounting, of course, pulls in the data from all over the organization. What is the ownership concept on this? It's really not a helpful concept on this. The beginnings and the ends are not identified. And a good way to think about it is you will no longer need your data program when you no longer need your HR or your finance programs in your organizations. If you have an HR group, I'm pretty sure nobody, when they come to the next round of layoffs or whatever happens, says, I think we've got HR going really, really well here, and we don't need to worry about lawyers or policies or bad behavior at all, right? We know that's not the case. And organizations do have to make that kind of a commitment. Programs require ongoing support in order to make this work. A third step, secure board level commitment. I've worked with a lot of executives, and about half of them understand this necessity, and about half of them absolutely just doesn't get it. So I've stopped really working with the top levels and going to the boards, because the boards sit on multiple boards of multiple organizations. They are a better way of populating this down. They're also seen as outside experts around this. So we call this the data doctrine. Somebody pick something called a data doctrine, do something that works for your organization. It's, again, going to be a program, not a project. Remember, we're tied to HR, finance, et cetera, but it's resourced for the duration. It's an ongoing process. It doesn't mean that you're always going to need 100 data scientists, but it does mean you're going to be having some data as part of your organization going forward, or your organization isn't actually accomplishing anything. It also gives you an objective means of determining alternative courses of organization, whether you need to change the upper level structure, have a CDO reporting not to the CIO and maybe to the CEO, or there's, right now we have about 1/3 of CDOs reporting directly to CIO, 1/3 of CDOs report directly to CEOs, 1/3 of them report to CIOs, and 1/3 of them report to a CXO, typically a risk or a finance-based focus in there, and that they can determine corrective courses of action in order to move forward and measure progress around this. Now, there have been many, many of us that have been attempting this over the years to say, we need to get better data-driven, data-focused, data first, data provocative. There are lots and lots of names, and these are great names, but I'm not sure what they really mean. And I'm pretty sure if I don't understand them, most of the other folks do not really understand them either. So I went back to the Agile Software Manifesto. You're seeing it on the screen here right now. It's pretty straightforward. It's got a couple little tenets that are in there, and it's a very short, literally, this is it that you're looking at on the left-hand side of the page here. So I'll put mine up on the other side of the page. I shouldn't say mine, my colleague and writing partner, Todd Harbour, and I came up with these on our own, and we'll make it bigger here so you can actually see it. Again, the data doctrine starts out just exactly the same way as the Agile Manifesto did. We are uncovering better ways of doing IT systems by doing it and helping others do it. Through this work, we have come to value, and there are 4 pieces in there, and we're going to actually add a little bit to it. So that continues and says, yes, that is, while there is value on the items on the right, we value the items on the left more. This is the totality of the Agile Manifesto, and all the good things that have happened in terms of improving software development have derived from this particular work. I think we need something similar here. I would love to engage in a dialogue with all of you to see if we can improve this even better. But the 4 that I've come up with, again, Todd and I came up with, is that data programs really need to drive IT programs, that informed investing in data has to be valued over technology acquisition activities, that stable shared organizational data has to be valued over IT component evaluation. Again, a timely joke here, but the Secret Service probably would have benefited from that particular piece here as they're trying to find those missing texts from January 6th of 2021. And finally, data reuse over the acquisition of new data sources. It's not to say that you're always going to find the data that you have, but there's two important facts about this from a literacy perspective that are critical. One, 80% of the data in your organization today is rot. ROT is an acronym that stands for data that is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. The only argument I have ever gotten from any organization is it's not 80%, but it's greater than 80%. The second part of this is that most organizational data is never analyzed or utilized. So we have a lot of stuff around, but we can't kind of figure out which are the good bits and which are the bad bits in order to look at this. This doctrine piece now moves us into the next component, which is step 4. We need to move into understanding it, inventorying our data assets, begin to accumulate and understand these. The data asset inventories are kind of an interesting piece on this. Most organizations, and again, imagine a conversation with a CEO. CEO says, oh, okay, Peter, you're now the new CDO, and I listened to some guy on the web, and he said you should start off with a data inventory. Can be done that on Friday. Well, you can say authoritatively that Peter Aiken says that no organization has ever completed a data inventory in the entire history of the world. And of course, the CEO immediately comes back and says, what? What are we doing and why? And the idea is, of course, we need to have the capabilities so that as we identify our piles of data, we can start to sort them and understand them and protect them. It's back to a very simple Deming quote, you can't manage it if you can't find it. So we need to take a look all the way around in that. I've given you the contents of a sample data inventory here. I'm not going to go through it, but purpose statements are critical for your data items. Don't talk about definitions. They are not helpful. Purpose statements incorporate organizational specific motivation for them. There's specific strategic elements, rationale, and justification that we need to have in order to do this. We need to be able to determine what data items we're sharing externally, internally, and what we use to derive those data items. And finally, there are items that are maybe perhaps not shared, but that support work group activities around here. I already mentioned the organizational rot, redundant, obsolete, or trivial. And again, 80% of your data in your organization falls into that category. The subject areas that you can start to pull together, the domains, some people call them, although that's got a very specific database term on this, that we can start the process of identifying, deduping, and harmonizing these, looking for things such as a golden source. We can get a handle on sensitive or personal data and understand the controls that need to happen in order to safeguard this and document all of these so that we now have a much more comprehensive picture of all of this. I'm going to focus here in on the word understanding for just a minute. And this is one of the pieces that we have to drive home to all of our executives. All of our businesses have architectures. Sometimes there are components of a business architecture, process architecture, et cetera, around all of these. And my experience is that about 1 in 10 organizations manage these well on this. If you are starting this process, it represents the opportunity to achieve a sustained competitive advantage. However, if you're managing the architecture, it needs to be understood. It needs to be documented in order to make it useful to others. So this is one of the reasons we're doing the inventory, and this is one of the reasons we need to get to this level of understanding. And understanding is really a 3-way component. We understand the architecture, which means it's documented and articulated as a digital blueprint, connecting the interconnections among the various architectural components. And the understanding is shared not just between 2 users that are looking at the data, but also between the users and the systems. And the further we go into controlled vocabularies, taxonomies, ontologies, and all the rest of the machine learning components that we're going to look at over the next couple of years, the better off the organization will be. And the goal of this is to achieve something like a model like this. Now, this is a very small model, but it's simply, and by an accurate one as well, this is the way one organization said, we are going to talk about these data elements in this way with this vocabulary. And this is a piece that goes up on everybody's wall so that they can look at this and refer into it, and they will all start to do this. Just even doing this helps organizations tremendously by being able to understand how these terms are used. And I don't have to remember that I'm talking to the marketing person or the infrastructure person over here, and they use different words. It gets us all on the same sheet of paper in order to do this. Just a quick example on that. And again, this gives us the ability to find out then, where are these coming from? How are these elements shared within the organization? And hopefully we'll stamp out the urge that some people still have to own data as individuals, as programs, as opposed to the organization owning data, and that they are steward or trustees of the data. Number 5, we want to try to ritualize the process. Rituals are important to us as a society. Rituals are important to us personally. Everybody has their own set of rituals, but it also creates a baseline for us. Last year, this bad thing happened, and we're going to make sure it doesn't happen again. I have one organization that I've worked with on and off for the years, and I'll start to tell them a story, and they'll go, "Stop, Peter. Are you going to tell us the chocolate story again?" I know I've made a success when I understand that, when I get that kind of a piece, because they understand the chocolate story, whatever the chocolate story happens to be. We need to make progress against this mountain of data debt. I've already said 4/5 of all of your data is redundant, obsolete, or trivial. That means anytime you're trying to figure out what you're trying to get, where it's coming from, what you're doing with it, it's going to be problematic. It also gives us the ability to get better at improving. Again, one of the things that people look at is, how come we're not fixed? Well, it's going to take some time to fix us. But if we can start to improve, again, what's the phrase? One day at a time, right? In terms of the 12-step programs. The cost of insufficient data for the organization continues to be reduced, which means we should be seeing improved productivity and improved results all the way around. Step 5 goal is not to get a final count of the total data deficit practices, but what's happening, what are the drags that are on our specific mission. I'm going to tell a very brief, quick story on this. This is just, I think, a good question to ask. Why would you expect somebody with a PhD in chemical engineering to know whether a product called FoxPro was Y2K compliant? Now, let's just start off right away. Y2K was not a hoax. It actually was real. Most of us lived through it, and I know a lot of you don't believe it, but it actually was real. So here's the context. It's an international chemical company, and they're doing all sorts of engine testing in this particular environment. So they're trying to get the fuels to burn cleaner, the engines to run smoother, the machines to last longer. And when they need to do this, they go downstairs and turn an engine on. And these tests, they run tens of thousands of tests annually at a cost of up to $250,000 per test. So we put together a chart for them to help improve their knowledge worker productivity. And the idea is we described several instances of manual data transfer, actually not a few, we described many instances of manual data transfer, manual file recovery, movement, duplication, cutting and pasting that was undocumented around these things, using synonyms incorrectly, the ability to understand tribal knowledge, and finally, the last part of this, which is the aha, FoxPro was never made Y2K compliant, which was the problem that they had asked us to come solve for them in the very first place. Now, when they looked at this, they came back and said, well, okay, let's put in place some better literacy around this, and we can reduce expenses, improve our competitive edge and customer service, and time savings and operational capabilities. But this is not our number. This was their number. They took this organization and said we are $25 million a year more productive as a result of this data integration. There's an assessment now in step 6 of our capabilities. What is it that we're trying to learn? The good data practices have to replace the bad data practices. Just like any bad habit, you need another good habit in order to replace it. So we can start to assess our capabilities against the objective standards and report on the specific progress annually. It gets us back into that ritual type of thing as well. It requires improvements to the organizational data literacy and allows us to surge and seed resources that are required for specific projects around this, and improve the inter-data silo communications among various team members so that we can collaborate better and enjoy things like a critical design review designed to catch errors before they get out the door around this, and gives a clear focus on how to improve data and the data practices that are involved in this. See, most people are really not aware of how all this works. Something simple like a log file. Well, why would it be important for everybody to understand a log file? Well, if you're a young person driving the car and in real life you lift your device and you dial a phone number and then notice you have a police car following you and stopping you because you were recording or not paying full time and attention, that could be a problem. On the other hand, if you understand that the same log file can be a defense against that kind of accusation and say, no, they didn't lift the device. They said, hey, Siri. And they said, hey, call somebody. And then they get stopped, right? There's a little bit of better defensiveness in there and gives knowledge workers in general the idea that, hey, if it's keeping track of it over here, I wonder if this other system is also keeping track of things in a log file. Again, those of you that are not familiar with the story of Tom Brady, he was accused of doing something bad. And so he broke his phone, hoping that would delete all of his messages. Again, he was probably no more successful at that than the Secret Service were at destroying their piece. The reason this is important is because we're now starting to realize that our reputations are a combination of who we are, who we say we are, and who other people say we are. So within this kind of capabilities thing, this gives you the ability to now start better managing both what people expect from you as well as what you can present to other organizations. All right, next step, number 7, implement useful crowdsourcing. Ask for and receive data management capabilities that can address our shortcomings on this. Most organizations go, data is everybody's responsibility, right? Well, how's that working out? And the answer is not very well. So instead, let's find some useful areas. Remember, first of all, our goal in data literacy is to start crunching down and eliminating the data debt and helping organizations do this understanding of it. Crowdsourcing in limited areas with very specific focused results allows it to help. But you also need to create a data community in your organization. Every organization I've consulted with, and it's been well over 500 in the past 40 years, has pockets of data expertise around that they're not known in the organization. It's usually somebody in the back of the room who's sitting there listening to me and saying, yep, I see your kind come and go. That was a military example in particular. They were always there. And say, look, are we really going to be serious about it this time? Well, we've made the public statement. We're now saying we're going to take this out to the next level because these are team-based approaches to problem solving that need to happen. And we can help that support the data passionate ones, but we can also calibrate, educate, and just as important, I believe, celebrate past data happenings that have gone very involved. Keeps everybody focused on these common objectives, reinforces strategy, and rapidly generates new ideas. Let me give you a quick example here. I have a leveled situation that I've put into the book. This is level 3, which is citizen data knowledge areas. If you are a knowledge worker for any of our organizations that we work with, you need to understand concepts such as data stewardship, such as the ability to demonstrate value with data, that you are using current data and current methods in order to do this, that you understand what a fiduciary responsibility is. You are being entrusted with this on the part of somebody else. And finally, that we share a shared fate. If we don't understand we're all swimming in the swimming pool, nobody's going to be particularly worried when somebody drops, we'll just say a turd in the punch bowl, but that's probably completely inappropriate. Anyway, let's keep moving on. Commit to remediate that, right? We want to get up and start fixing things. So the organization, instead of saying we're all going to fix it by Friday and everything will be perfect by then, it's better to look at it in a series of graduated steps that allow us to say, out of the bunch of things that we're trying to do that help further organizational strategy, some subset of those will be related to data that is in use by the business And perhaps that is either problematic or not as well known as it should be. And finally, that we can use it as a chance to improve our data skills. And the intersection of those three pieces is a great place to take a look at what's going on in terms of data improvements. Again, a quick little example here. Logistics company out in the middle of our country, Fortune 450. And I'm there for a completely different purpose, but there's a room full of 100 associates. And I look around and there's paper flying all over the place and things going on. It's kind of a, like one of those days on Wall Street when they show everything's throwing around and that sort of thing. Turned out that their mainframe system, which is what we were actually there to help them correct, had very poor data on the bills. So they were manually correcting every item on every invoice. It was the wrong date, it was the wrong time, it was the wrong product, it was the wrong price. And they didn't want to send these out, feeling it was kind of bad. So I made a note to the manager over charge of this particular part of the operation and said, there's better ways of correcting this than treating and correcting all the symptoms. And his answer was, I couldn't imagine what it is. I just had the best quarter of the best year that I have ever had, and was getting ready to spend $6 million to double the number of people in that particular room. Well, again, none of these folks were data literate in this sense, because all I had to do was walk down the hall to the CFO and say, would you like to improve cash flow on your $8 billion that you make a year by 30 days? And without batting an eyelash, she turned around to me and said, if you could do it for less than $800 million in a month, you'd have a positive return on that investment. Yes, that's why finance people like numbers. So again, literacy, this very broad challenge with wide variability and really cannot be binary, has not, is not, will not work for us. Similarly, though, this won't either. That's way too much, completely dense in here. And when I look at what's been happening in the area of data literacy efforts, I find it's data people arguing with other data people about whether we should have 3 courses in statistics or 4 courses in statistics. Well, when I say it doesn't matter, it's not material and it's inessential. It's because data people already have this kind of knowledge. What we need to do, in fact, is look at our workforce organization, find out what does matter, what is material, and what is essential in order to do this. So to divide the problem up a little bit, I think we're going to pass 8 billion people sometime this fall on planet Earth. When I wrote the book, it was 7.7 billion people. Of those, 2.5 billion of them have a mobile device that is connected to the internet. 1.5 billion of those are adults, and 1 billion of those are knowledge workers. That's the target I think we need to aim at from a societal perspective, but also from an organizational perspective. Let's take a look at those levels really quickly. Again, mobile data spreaders, that's where I would do the data literacy. Now, that's the idea that you're going to hand a young person who's perhaps fairly young and in school a supercomputer that is connected to the internet. They should have some knowledge about what's going on in that area, but we can't do anything about it. We have no ability to tell all parents that kids need to be data literate before they get their phones. We also similarly don't have any ability to control adults and their behavior with these things. We can put some societal pressure on them and say, these things ought to happen, but I have to draw a line there and say that that's really below our ability to do anything about. Now, there are some interesting components there, though. From an ethical perspective, the motivations of adults and mobile data spreaders are to avoid being fooled or manipulated. Similarly, the behavioral focus is inwardly focused on the individual. That's natural and the way it probably should be. But once we get above this line to where the knowledge workers are, we can, through codes of conduct that belong to a professional organization, or perhaps, codes of conduct, and employment agreements. These are things that we can now start to say, no, you really can't work for yourself. You're really working for us because we pay your salary. I'm going to skip the topic of data teaching, but everybody, I think, from all the sessions that we've had so far, understand that data is increasing at this rate, and our ability to produce data analysts is only not even close to catching up on this. It is just crazy that's out there. But we do need to work on the data professionals. And the idea is that most data professionals come to it as the blind people approaching the elephant did. One grabs the tail, one grabs the ear. They're all different and they think that's data. Well, it's not a holistic picture, and consequently they are less effective than they need to be. Similarly, we can also add into this process the ability to say your duty as a data professional and as a knowledge worker is to avoid fooling or manipulating others, and that your behavioral focus is mandated to be on the organization and the results that we're attempting to achieve in that. Let me talk about knowledge workers in particular, because I think this is the area of biggest lift. I know this is a very busy slide. I wanted to make sure I gave it to you in context, but roughly 1/3 of a knowledge worker's time is spent reworking or recreating knowledge that's existed. And only 10% of the time is actually spent on the creation of new information. In fact, if you ask knowledge workers what they would rather do, they would rather do household chores or pay bills than navigate over your stupid content management systems and repositories that exist out there. That's not to say that your repository systems and content management systems are stupid, but it is very poorly implemented. And if you're telling people that they have this much aversion to doing them, it's going to be a major issue. When asked to incorporate data, many organizations just drop new data on people, but it's not translating into employee adoption. 48% of, by the way, these surveys are from the Data Literacy Project. I've got the reference for you down there at the bottom. 48% of knowledge workers report frequently deferring decision makings to decisions based on gut. So in other words, I could analyze the data, but I'm just going to wing it, right? 2/3, however, of C-suite of executives also frequently defer to gut. So this lack of data skills is hurting us from a productivity perspective. 74% of our workers report feeling overwhelmed or unhappy when working with data. That's certainly not going to produce a nice set of results in order to do that. And 1/3 of them spend at least 1 hour a week procrastinating over data-related tasks, and more than 1/3 said they'd find another task, another way of finishing the task, incorporating it. In this, and 14% of them avoid the task entirely. Again, bad ideas. This is a tremendous source of untapped productivity in this. I mentioned also that our knowledge workers are our first line of defense as we're trying to put in place better ethical standards around all of these. So replacing the replacing the can I thinking with should I thinking. It's now required, at least in my courses, to watch the Netflix show Coded Bias, which I always get a call from somebody the next day where they say, do you think my boss knows about this? Yes, I believe your boss does, but it wouldn't be bad to have a conversation either way. I have a case study on this. It's not part of this particular talk, but I'll just give you the link there so that you can come back to it later on. Step 9 is trying to get us to a self-funding acumen in this context. The idea is that we've got to have the ability to get good at executing data improvements, that there are all sorts of prioritized initiatives that we can get to, but we can't fix everything at once. The remediation steps offer opportunities for combining and optimizing those particular steps and creating a baseline organization on this. Now, this next slide doesn't actually play much, but if you look at what's going on, it's Bruce Springsteen playing a Bee Gees song. And you might say to yourself, what the heck are we talking about and why? Well, first of all, Bruce Springsteen's got a great band and he's got great music. Those are two things that you need to have in order to get this right. That's a little bit right, because I've got it going in my ears. So the only way you get good music is not just having good music, but it's good music and good musicians in order to put this together. And what we're trying to do is get the entire organization to sing off of the same sheet of music. Step 10, increase personal accountabilities. This is commit to doing the resources so that people understand this, getting reviews, incorporating literacy levels. Again, we don't want people to be just binary about this, but it's a programmatic activity. Again, take an old person like myself and look at the amount of change I've had to do just to do my love of music. I started out with, records and went to cassettes and 8-tracks and MP3s and lossless and a lot of things have moved around. And of course, the number of devices that I've had is really complicated and expensive as well. This incorrectly accounted expense requires knowledge workers to learn these data management skills, and they've done so with various successes. The program needs to take a long-term view. Again, one day at a time is the way it works. So our goals around this are defined just even something as simple as removing a click from an existing repetitive process, tallying the clicks, and then accurately describing the results of that particular improvement. The idea around this is something that I go back to called the theory of constraints from Elihu Goldratt, and it's the idea, if it kind of looks like plan, do, check, act, that's exactly the way it is. There's no point in reinventing a separate thing. Plan, do, check, act. The Deming circle makes perfect sense in order to do this. The idea here is that we're trying to get people to understand we can do this, but it's not going to get better instantly or perfectly. Then we want to go back and improve our capabilities. Here's our plan, do, check, act cycle on this. So again, demonstrate a commitment, focus a community-based effort on knowledge or knowledge workers in the organization, give it regular reinforcement and address specific prioritized deficiencies, institutionalizing this into the data strategy cycle. Is Mark still here? No, Mark took off. All right, Mark was in the room here a little bit, but I'd love to give Mark this credit for this. We were, I believe, at this conference last year. Of course, we weren't here in person last year, but Mark was scribbling on a little chat. He said, you know, if you've got digital and you subtract data, I'm not sure what you have, but I do know that if you have data and you subtract digital, you still have the data left over, and that's a pretty valuable thing. So I thought that was a really great piece of insight, and it really does get to this whole digital transformation that everybody wants to do, but we haven't told people that you cannot go digital by just spelling data. It's not enough. It requires more work, and we've got to do things in a slightly different fashion in order to do this. Some of the ways this manifests itself is a real recent technology realization from LinkedIn. So this is an individual who said, hey, I've got some poop emoji. I've dressed it up a little bit, but it's still a poop emoji, right? And I've got anything awesome in the middle. You're still going to end up with bad results on the other side. And his realization was, this is true without blockchain, and it's true with blockchain. Well, it's true with anything. And if we're not teaching people this and forcing them to realize this, and he's just recently come up with this, I can't think of how much wasted productivity we've had looking at this over the years. Digital garbage and any sort of a model is going to give us garbage digital results, whether the thing in the middle is a data warehouse, machine learning, business intelligence, blockchain, AI, MDM, data governance, analytics, technology of any sort. It is going to be a disaster. Only when we replace the digital bad stuff with digital good stuff and then start to populate that on through, then we can start to harmonize things. And I've saved companies well over $1.5 billion over my career by doing simple things like combining data flows, not resending the same data around over and over and over again. Again, the numbers are very clear and very stark. Now that we've populated this with good data, we can get better digital results as we're trying to move on this. One final piece on this, just to address the machine learning piece in particular. It's a very tricky problem, but machine learning these days has literally run out of training data. And as I mentioned this in the book, and until we get back to the good data that we have, which when they say there's no good training data, it's because 4/5 of the data is not the right stuff. So we want to make sure that we have the right kind of training data in order to do this. This is only going to happen if we treat data as an asset. So these are some wonderful objective criteria from my colleague, Chris Bradley. Do you have executive positions? Does the organization track the usage? Has the organization put controls in place to manage the asset? Are the controls executed? Is there general acceptance of the idea that we need to have this managed on this? And are there discussions about this at senior management meetings? If we don't have them, it's not being done. Finally, of course, the last place all the way around on this is evangelizing. We've seen the light. We have to understand the pervasiveness of and progress against data debt. We've got to make contributions to the profession. That's one of the reasons we're here working at this conference, all of us without pay in order to do this. It is an absolute calling for us. We've got to institutionalize these principles and address have-nots. They are fairly easy to identify when they start existing within an organization that is better prepared for all of this. There's a whole series of challenges for enterprise leaders: workforce resistance, lack of champions, incorporating new and different types of data governance, overcoming insecurities, silos. But the main thing out there is to stop focusing on technology first. 80% of our challenges, as we started out here, are focused on people and process based. And if we don't improve the way people use the data that we're giving them and improve just the data, we will not achieve results. Now, we just did, Bigger's talk. If you didn't get a chance to see that, he used a little bit of Maslow in here, but I like Maslow as well. Everybody remembers from high school that you start off with physiological needs, and this little hierarchy I'm going to show you here is very important to understand that we have to have the first level. If you have food and clothing needs that are unmet, you will not be safe. If you are not safe, you will never be part of something that is bigger than yourself. If you're not part of something that's bigger than yourself, it's kind of hard to differentiate between you and everything else on this. And finally, what we're trying to get to for all of our employees is this self-actualization. This has now been hijacked by the TED people. They call it your flow, but it's still the same concept in there. Ido added these other wonderful pieces in here as well and said, we need the internet, Wi-Fi, and batteries in order to make it work, which I thought was a brilliant piece of insight in there. And I tried to do the same thing here with our pieces. The first three of these are really focused on the mobile data spreaders, and they're physiological in nature. The next ones are safety oriented, trying to get to the adult data spreaders. Then we've trying to develop a community, get us love and belonging, get us to the point where we can really, really start to be good about teaching these things. We really suck at it for the most part as a society. I hope you understand there are plenty of really good data teachers, but you wouldn't know that from reading your college catalogs. And finally, get us to the point where we can be self-actualized all the way around in order to do this. Again, quick little note about the pricing of the books on there, because publisher always wants to sell the books, but now we've got a few minutes left. Andy, if there's any questions out there at all, I've got a couple of folks in the room that are welcome to ask questions as well.
Sorry. Great. Thanks, Peter. Awesome. Just awesome. So much great content. There was one comment from the audience, which was from Sarah Davies, who said, "I love the comment about data being soil. My husband likes to say that he doesn't grow plants. He makes soil and the seeds go from there. Without good soil, the seeds won't do anything with it. His job is minimal once they start. Applying the same importance to the foundation of data strategy seems like such an obvious thing, but one I hadn't thought of until your comment." So clearly
Thank you, Sarah, for a wonderful comment. And my point on this, Andy, is that when somebody says data is the new oil, it's actually okay to go back and challenge them on it and say, that's a good start, but let's see if we can push it a little bit further and come up with an even more useful concept around that. So that's a great thing. Thanks for sharing, Sarah.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you, Peter. What a great session. Okay, folks, we'll have a little bit more than a 30-minute break here, and then be back at 3 for the session on the selection of data and analytics measurement entity to improve business performance. Really excited to see you all in about 35 minutes. Thanks again, Peter. Really awesome session. Learned so much.
Cheers, everybody.
All right. Thanks.